nah, we only accept kuna, right? So I'm like, nah, I don't got no kuna. So now I gotta go, find the ATM, and get kuna, right? So that's the other thing about traveling, right? Is you really have to understand, especially when you're relocating, you have to really understand that foreign exchange, right? You really have to understand them pips, which is like the smallest decimal of being able to understand the value of a currency pair and things like that. So you know that you're getting the value for, like, you're not paying too much for something, right?
Hey, welcome to Travel Tuesday Happy Hour, where we interview dope people doing dope things. Today, I want to introduce this dope brother here. My brother, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, no doubt. Shout out to the Qs. I had to put the dog on real quick for him. That's what's up, dog. Yo, so I'm Darron Daniels, and I'm from Pottstown. I work in cybersecurity in the healthcare industry. And now I'm over here in Prague, on global assignment. So, I'm happy to join the good brother here, talk about some good things.
Awesome. So what got you into traveling? Well, let's back up a little bit. How long have you been in Prague?
Yeah, so I actually been coming back and forth to Prague for like the last 5 years, right? So,
wow.
And then I finally relocated, actually a year ago. So, next week probably will be next week will be a whole year. Yeah, it was interrupted, of course. I was home for a couple months with with the whole COVID thing, but yeah, it's been a year.
Oh wow. So I mean, I want to get to like how you got started traveling, but I visited Prague last year in October, and it was
you be bouncing around, dog. You was in Prague. I see you taking pictures. I'm like, bro, right down the street.
Well, the secret is when I post my pictures, it's literally 3 months later.
Yeah. It's that. So, but I could have seen dog coming through London or something like that, because I'd be seeing you on the move. But
yeah, it wasn't after the fact that Troy was like, "Yo, my profile lives out that way," and I was like, "Oh man, like had I known, I already reached out." But Prague was stop number 2 in like a 5-city tour. And so I did Oktoberfest, so went to Munich. We went to Prague, Vienna, Budapest, and then ended up in Lisbon. And so, Prague has a vibe about it that you just want to be like, yo, why do I want to go anywhere else? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the feeling that you get. And that's kind of what, so when you think about traveling, right, you think about, there's traveling. Typically when you're traveling to a place and you get a taste of that place, right? You get, a taste of that culture, you get exposed. And typically when you're traveling also, you're dealing with hospitality, you're dealing with a lot of individuals that, that are used to engaging tourists, right? And, you might stay for a week or two and experience that and then go on to your next location, right? But, from my perspective, coming back and forth, from a travel perspective, the last couple of years, and then actually, making that transition to international living, that's kind of like a different experience, right? Because, now, that global experience of a global relocation, that whole process is, it's a different perspective, because now you're actually integrating into this new world, right? That it's not for a short stint. That, it's going to be pretty much for the long haul. So now you really have to start to adapt, right? You have to start to adapt to the culture, learn the culture, because that's just out of respect, right? So, you want to understand, how to greet people, how people greet you, right? Because now you're kind of living amongst the locals versus, just a quick trip.
So what really made you say, you know what, I'm moving? I mean, I know we got some hot topics to discuss later, but like, what really was the tipping point that said, you know what, I mean, life's great, life's good, I have some good things here, but I gotta go?
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't really that, right? It's just opportunity. And a lot of people, when you visit somewhere, right? When we travel and whether we're going to the islands, whether it's Jamaica or Aruba or different things like that for vacation, sometimes you're like, man, like what would it be like to live here, right? A lot of times you'd be like, yo, what would it be like to really live here? And be able to, experience what the locals experience, right? So, from my perspective, it was more about, just opportunity from a work perspective, when you get a global reassignment and the opportunity presents itself, for me, I understand that, you will miss 100% of the opportunities that you don't pursue, right? So if there's an opportunity that presents itself and you have to go through that mental triage to really understand if this opportunity is for you, then you go for that opportunity and then you figure it out. So, I was, blessed to have that opportunity, thought through it. And, I didn't really second guess that. Right. So, I just, went for it.
Okay, awesome. Did you have a family that you moved out with, or was it just you by yourself?
Yeah. So it's me by myself now, because actually when you start to go through that process, it's like, okay, now, especially if you have a home and things like that, you got kids in school, you start to think about that whole process, right? Actually renting your house out or selling your house and doing things like that. But, it's crazy because, we kind of had it all mapped out, right? It was, the whole assignment was arranged that, my family could come over, I would come back, and you had the whole, schedule. You had all that arranged. Even when I came back in May, my objective was actually to bring my daughter back. She just graduated from IUP, bring her back, have her be able to, she's a fashion major, so Europe is perfect for that. But then COVID hit and just put the kibosh on all that, right? With the travel and things like that. So, we'll make another attempt at that, next year to see how that goes. But yeah.
Okay. So what got you into traveling in the first place?
Again, so traveling, domestically in the U.S., I've kind of always done that, in reference to, vacations and going different places in the summer. So that was always, intriguing within itself, being in different, visiting different places and things from that perspective. And then with work, I had my first assignment, I was actually in Brussels, in Belgium, back in, might have been 06 or so, right? So I was in Belgium and I was staying at this place, called the Grand Place, which is actually called it's called the Grote Market, right in the heart of Belgium. And experiencing, having that experience, being kind of dropped off, I can say I was a youngin', I was in my early 30s. So, being dropped off in a place where you don't necessarily, understand, the language. You got people speaking different languages. You're trying to get food. The menus are, the menus aren't in English. Not every establishment had the English menu, but then you start to look at these buildings, right? You start to look at these buildings from the 1600s and from the 1700s, and you're looking at this architecture. You're looking at the cobblestone, and you're just taking in this atmosphere. And again, you get that feeling like, man, like what would it be like, to live here? And then, I like to drink the brews. So, and actually, I always got a brew on deck. So, but I like to drink the brews. So especially when you're in Europe, that's what you do. You're experiencing that. You're seeing different museums and castles. And to me, that was kind of like my first, intrigue, into traveling. And then from there, getting back, I was back and forth to Canada for a while. And Canada's in the province of Quebec. So there's some French speaking, but for the most part, it's a little easier to navigate because, people speak English in Canada. But, then visiting like the east and west of Old Montreal. And again, if you visit Old Montreal, it's, it takes you back also to that European feeling with the cobblestones and things like that. So, you start to put yourself, in that perspective, like I think I could do this, right? Traveling, especially internationally, right? And when you're traveling internationally, there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on with that, right? As far as being able, passports and everything else, customs, and going through that whole nine. And then actually, what was really cool, man, I ended up in Singapore, actually in Asia. So when I was in Asia. One, I found out that Singapore was actually a pretty expensive place, right? It's pretty expensive. It's really that New York type of feel, but it's very multicultural, right? So you got Malaysians, you got Philippines, right? You got Thailand, and then you got some people from the U.S. sprinkled in there, and then you also got the locals. So going back to the food. They have this thing called chili crab. And every time you're traveling is, food is a big part of it, right? Food is a big part of the culture. So you have to, open yourself up to being able to, experience these different tastes, these different vibes, and, different places. Like if you look up Singapore, you will see this massive hotel with this big boat on top, right? So that's the Marina Bay Sands. And it's like the most extravagant hotel, you'll ever see. And that big boat on top, it's actually a full length, almost swimming pool, on the rooftop, which is, and going up there, you see the whole city. So Sentosa Island, and actually another dope thing about Singapore is, they have this thing called the night safari, which is the zoo, the Singapore Zoo. And, that whole attraction is just another one of those things that, takes you out of your element for a little bit, from being home. And I think, once you start to have those types of experiences and be around different people and, taking that in and understanding things, it makes you, it gives you that inspiration, right? It gives you that inspiration to say, there's more out there. There's more out there. And when you start to see what that more is, and you start to, be able to navigate through that, it's very enlightening.
Yeah, it's like a good drug, right?
Yeah.
You get a euphoric high, but it's also therapeutic at times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting you mentioned Belgium, right? My first work trip for the company I work for now I went to Leuven. And Leuven's the home of Anheuser. And so, that was an eye-opener as far as being able to travel and not understand the languages or read the signs. Trying to read street signs, trying to read the menus and stuff like that was pretty interesting. But, it was also interesting in the city that I was in to see how it was like going to state college, right? It was a university town where it has schools and everything like that. So it was interesting to see how different things. And what I got from that experience was, how they wear those robes in Harry Potter. They do that at the different school clubs in Belgium. So I was just like, oh, that was pretty interesting. Singapore as well. So with Singapore, I've never been to Singapore, but it's on my bucket list. And I'm not gonna lie, it's on my bucket list because of Crazy Rich Asians, right? The movie. And so it's one of those things where it's like they painted such an elaborate picture of what the country looks like. And there's a particular scene where they go to one of the food markets and show you that there's still traditional meals being made in the food markets and not just your regular fast food type of stuff. And so I really appreciate how you're explaining it, because you're giving it more of a vibe that we can go out there and really make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. You think about, so there's three things, right? When I think about traveling, there's traveling, there's vacationing, right? And there's this whole other element of, global reassignment where you're getting permanent or long-term residency and going through all that. But, when you think about traveling and vacationing, like traveling is about experience, right? Traveling is about trying to learn something while you're there, right? And not to say that either one's better than the other, but vacationing is I'm going to go be out, right? I'm going to go jet ski, I'm going to go do some excursions, I'm going to go sit on the beach, and things like that. But traveling is you're really looking for a little something more, right? Sometimes when you go to say, the islands and things, you might venture off the resort and go into the local town. But when you're traveling, that's really what you want to do, right? You want to stay in the local town, right? You want to kind of, take your week and be, amongst the locals. You want to exchange your currency, right? And you want to, use the local currency, so it's like, you really want to be able to get that education, from that particular trip.
So I noticed you've been moving around, like, going to different places while you're out there. Yeah. Let's say within Europe itself, what's say your top 5 places to visit?
Yeah. So when you say, moving around, that's kind of like the freedom that you have being in Europe, right? Because, when you're in, when you're in the States, you can go to, New Jersey, New York, you go to different states, but here that's like going to different countries. So if you think about, how Prague is actually situated, we border Germany, Austria, Poland, Slovakia, right? So all these countries are surrounding, the Czech Republic. So it's like you can get in the car and drive, 4 hours to one of these countries. And recently, I was just coming back from Croatia, and Croatia is dope. It's kind of like the Caribbean of, it's kind of like the Caribbean of, of Europe. And if you live in the Czech Republic and you want to go to the beach, that's kind of, you either want to go to, Croatia, Greece, Italy, because, when you're in Central Europe, like we are in here, if you want to go to the beach, that's kind of where you go.
That's like going to Rehoboth from like Philly, Delaware, New Jersey. I mean, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey.
Exactly, but you just in clear waters on the Mediterranean Sea and in the Adriatic, in the Adriatic Sea. But from a travel perspective, that's what it's like. And unfortunately, right now, that's kind of hampered because you got the different restrictions even within Europe. There's, and travel's not the same, right? Because you don't want to travel somewhere and then have to kind of be, quarantined or something like that. But, I'll just tell you a quick story, just about Croatia, because, part of traveling is when you have to figure out how to navigate. Money is a big thing that you have to figure out, right? It happened a bunch of times, even here in Prague, where you can go out, you can be grubbing and you can be having a good time, racking the bill up. And, you think you're cool. You got your Amex, you got MasterCard, you got Visa. You like, okay, it's whatever. And then they come to your table and be like, it's cash only, right? And that happens a lot, right? After you've been chilling, you're like, but they don't sweat that. They like, just, go to an ATM or whatever and, come get us on your way back. That's the one cool thing about being here. But when I was in Croatia, when I got there, I was like, man, I'm going to have some Mediterranean grub. I'm going to have some seafood. So again, man, I was sitting down. I had this whole big ass entree and shit in front of me, right? And, it's sea bass and crustaceans and all kinds of shit, right? But, so I'm grubbing and so I was like, well, I'm cool. I got every card. I got some US dollars. I got some crowns. I got some Corona, some crowns. So again, she comes to the table after I was done grubbing and she's like, nah, we only accept kuna. Right. So I'm like, nah, I don't got no kuna. So now I got to go, find the ATM, and get kuna. Right. So that's the other thing about traveling. Right. Is you really have to understand, especially when you're relocating, you have to really understand that foreign exchange. Right. You really have to understand them pips, which is like the smallest decimal of being able to understand the value of a currency pair and things like that. So you know that you're getting the value for, like, you're not paying too much for something, right? And when you exchange your money, you're getting the right exchange back. So those are things that that you don't typically think about when you're vacationing, because a lot of places you may vacation to, you exchange a couple bucks that's going to get you through the week, or you got traveler's checks, or if you're on a resort, everything's covered, so you don't really have to think as much about the money and the currency exchange rates and things like that. Yeah, so
yeah, I also went to Croatia. Like last year was a big year. We did Yacht Week in Croatia last year, and
mm-hmm.
we visited about 5 different islands on a boat.
Yeah.
Like literally lived on the boat all week, partied all week, drank. It was the be out, right?
Yep.
But I mean, when you talk about beauty of the nature, of the scenery, and the peace the water brings you, that was definitely one of my top 5 places to visit. So with that being said, like, what keeps you interested in travel? You mentioned culture and experiences. Like, what's that thing that drives you to say, you know what, I'm gonna get my car and drive somewhere or go somewhere?
So that's like, so why travel, right? So when you think about, why you travel, it's a couple of things. It's the education, right? You're getting an education that you might not get in a book. So just being able to challenge yourself to learn more. I think that you're always in continuous development, right? You're always looking at how you can analyze your strengths, analyze your weaknesses, right? And build on your weaknesses and take advantage of your strengths. And so, what kind of drives me from a travel perspective is that education, that challenging of yourself, because it's very intimidating. So don't get it twisted. It's not like, you just go travel, right? And you always got to be conscious. You always got to be aware, right? And so you always have to be on your P's and Q's, and pay attention. So, but it's that education, and through that process and your patience, you gain that education. It's that exposure, right? Just the exposure to, you mentioned the culture, of course, people, languages. Everybody doesn't do everything the same, but everybody does the same thing. Everybody is going to work. Everybody's trying to take care of their family. Everybody's trying to earn a living. Everybody is doing, the same thing in their own space, but everybody's not doing it the same way, right? And then you learn that. So it's that, and then it's kind of like, it's having that, having that vision, right? When you have vision, you start to see things that others can't see. You start to, vision yourself as you may have not visioned yourself before. And I think that travel does that, right? So travel does that. It allows you to kind of, see beyond your nose and kind of have a different perspective on things. And that keeps you, that kind of keeps you driving. Yeah.
So that's amazing. I mean, a lot of that I haven't really a lot of that I haven't really taken full in, not realizing that's what it was for me. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you articulating it that way. So I want to talk about kind of what's going on today here, right? In the United States, we've come to a place. I mean, not come to a place. We've been at a place where people of the Black and brown complexion have been kind of persecuted and or made to feel inferior, right? As a big Black man traveling Europe, what's been your experience?
It's see, again, this goes back to every country doesn't have the same history, right? So every country is not going to have the same perspective on, say, the treatment on African Americans in the US. They're not going to have that same perspective here, but they have that empathy to want to understand why, right? Like, you don't, what is it in America that makes, you know, people treat Black people the way that they do, right? What is it? What's that? What's that all about? Like, every country, they have their own history. They have, their own past and their own, I guess, challenges with other nations or with other people and with other cultures and things like that. But when you look at kind of what's going on in America, I really feel like globally, people are behind us as Black people. You see these movements popping up, right? Black Lives Matter. You see the support, you see the outcry, even from a George Floyd perspective, and you see a global support to say, why in America, does that type of stuff happen? Like, why would a cop kneel on somebody's neck, right? So from my perspective, I don't really necessarily feel any, straight out over racism or any, because again, it's like people don't know to be mad at me, right? There's no history of, slavery for Black people here. There is, but from the perspective of, say, civil rights and things like that, there's no, there's no reason to be mad at me. Maybe because I'm an American, or maybe because, they might feel like you're taking the job or something like that. But other than that, from a race perspective, I don't necessarily feel that. And if I did, I probably wouldn't recognize it, right? Because you don't know, sometimes you don't know whether you're sitting at a restaurant and it takes long for somebody to come, or you don't get the best service. You don't know whether that's just how that place is, or whether it's racism, right? So, again, I don't really have any fears, of course, moving about in Prague or anywhere else from a race perspective. But, it's you definitely don't walk past the cops here like you would in the US. You don't have that same type of, thought, like, what can happen if I get pulled over, or what can happen if, I'm just standing on the corner and the cops come up, and, you don't have that same type of feeling here.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier you had to move back to the States and then back. That was when the Corona pandemic started to kind of impact different people's entry. So where were you when Corona hit?
Yeah, actually, man, I was here, man. I was, watching the news, keeping up with, with how the whole thing evolves. And I stay very in tune with progresses. And I believe it was around March 13th or something when, we're getting news in the expat community about restrictions across the borders and lockdowns. And that was all, a very confusing time. People didn't know, you get a message that says, all right, you can leave this weekend. And if you don't leave, then, you could be stuck in Europe for an indefinite amount of time, based on how this thing starts to play out. So, I was getting those type of alerts, and I was watching, how things were progressing, of course, in the US, and, how the different announcements were coming around the restrictions and the lockdowns. So that was like March 13th. I think March 15th, I jetted and I came back, came back to the US, which was eerie, man. It was like, you get to the airport was empty. Airport's never empty, right? Airports, it's so empty that I'm like, am I at the right gate, right? I'm like, is the plane coming? So you're there at the airport, and I think I flew, I ended up, So I ended up having to actually fly to London. So I'm in London, and again, it was hysterical a little bit because, there were people that were, it's like the restrictions were popping up, right? It's like the restrictions were popping up. So no matter where you were traveling, it was like you're hoping that your flight's going to take off, right? You're hoping that you're going to be able to get on your flight. And the other thing about traveling at that time was whether or not you were a citizen somewhere, whether or not you had residency somewhere, or if you were traveling for leisure, then you might get stuck because you can't, because you might not have the proper documentation. You didn't know what you needed. And this was before they were saying, okay, if you have a test and you have a piece, you have a test, 72 hours before you can travel. But that wasn't the case because they weren't really testing at that time, right? It was just, the airports were kind of chaotic. But, and I got through London and then got to New York. Got to New York on a late night, and JFK was empty, right? So so right before you land, they come and give you these forms. You fill out the contact tracing forms. You fill out where you're coming from, what country you're coming from, etc. So you're filling out these forms. You get off the plane, and then you get met with people with hazmat suits on, and they're all suited and booted. So it was like. And you felt like you're kind of in the twilight zone, right? So they're taking your temperature. And then, of course, depending on what your temperature is, they had a whole box that said quarantine. So, you get through that piece and then boom, you're through customs and then you're out the door. And the way that JFK normally is, in reference to, how many people and lines and things like that, it was none of that, man. It was like, and then coming from JFK, traveling, through New York, past Philly, and then, to Pottstown where I live, it was like ghost town. Like all the lights were out, in New York, people were off the streets. So that was just, a real eerie type of travel right there.
You probably made it to Pottstown in less than hour 45 minutes.
Yeah. Man, it was like there was nobody on the road, right? Nobody, it was nobody. It was my driver and me, right? And it was like, smooth sailing all the way through. And, typically, of course, it's never like that. You can't, I don't care what time of day it is. You're not getting through New York, through Jersey, just like smooth. Unless you know some type of way or some type of time to do that. But not during this particular, time of the evening, you wouldn't be able to just do that.
Yeah, a lot of times it felt like I Am Legend. You know how when Will Smith goes through the streets just to do whatever he needs to do to stay sane, and especially the city of New York, like the city that never sleeps was put to sleep. You know what I mean? And that was the eerie part about things.
Yeah. So that was crazy, man. And to be honest, the whole thing has been crazy. But just coming back, with that type of vibe. But again, as long as your family's good, your family's safe, you're trying to make sure everybody's good. That's the things that you keep in perspective, right? So you understand, what the situation is. You understand, kind of what's going on. So you have to make sure you're paying attention to what's worthwhile.
Okay. And then when were you cleared to go back to Prague?
So I actually came back July 15th. And actually during that time, Prague was doing a lot better. They did I believe it was like 2 months of mandatory lockdowns, masks everywhere, inside and out. And they were really, they really brought that number down. It never really was actually up. You know what I mean? They actually were able to manage that, keep the cases down. They kind of hit it with a hammer, from the beginning. And so when I came back, things were open, right? Restaurants were open, people were able to go out and still be able to, to do their thing. So, that was good when I came back. But when I did come back, I was actually quarantined for 2 weeks, did the self-quarantine, and, before I went out back into the community.
Okay. So let's talk about the new normal, right? Like here in the United States, a lot of restaurants are kind of forced to have outdoor seating. limited indoor seating, masks everywhere. What have you seen changes made in Europe as it relates to moving around?
So right now we're actually on pretty much almost like a full lockdown for 2 weeks. Again, we're going with the mask inside and out. Restaurants can stay open for delivery and takeout windows. Essential services are open. Things like pharmacies and grocery stores and things like that. But up until this point, the new normal was pretty much normal here. For a while, it was pretty much normal. Versus kind of in the U.S. where things are a little bit different depending on where you're at. What that normal is. But I think we're just in a state of a new normal at this point, and we'd be like that for a while until you kind of get some mass participation, and because this thing needs everybody. Everybody has to kind of pitch in on this thing until there's a vaccine or something. So you're kind of going to be in this kind of back and forth situation. Things open up, things close, restrictions, no restrictions, until there's really full participation in a solution. And I think we're a little bit away from that, but that's pretty much how it's going to be. It's crazy, but that's what it is. Sit down somewhere for a minute.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. So when let's say when outside finally decides to open up, right? What are usually your top 5 checklist items before you make a trip, like a trip? So like some tips that somebody looking into traveling would check off their boxes before they make that move.
Well, step number 1 is make your pay your deposit. Right? I heard you talk about that before, but people start to try to plan trips with their friends and this and that, and you end up never going because somebody didn't pay their deposit and you're waiting. So, if you ready, right, and you trying to go experience something, pay your deposit. Make sure that you have enough money so you can enjoy yourself. And at the same time, don't overspend. Make sure that you're being diligent from that perspective. Transportation and stuff. So you want to look ahead and make sure where you're going, right, you can get to the places that you want to go. Because a lot of times when you travel, you get somewhere and you're like, man, I want to go to here or go there. But, you really have to be able to line up transportation. And Uber is not everywhere, right? So you have to make sure you can, get going where you want to go. You want to make sure that, you understand, from a communication perspective, right? Is this, depending on where you're going, if you're traveling, like I was saying, when you want to experience the locals and things like that, then you might want to understand, a little bit how to say hello, how to say, goodbye, how to say thank you, because people appreciate you a little more when you walk up in a place. Like when I first got to Prague, it was like, I walk up in somewhere and be like, what's up? They like, you know what I mean? Or you say hello. But when you walk up in a place and you say, ahoy, nobody, then you start to, just say, hello, good day, good morning. So, you want to understand that a little bit, man. I think, if you're going to travel, understand where you're going. Don't just, in my opinion, right? Everything I say is my opinion. Don't just show up, right? Understand a little bit about what you're going, and then you'll have a better time. Because a lot of times when you travel, you go places and you don't understand the layout and you don't understand the lay of the land, you just get there and then you're trying to figure it out. And then everybody in your group is frustrated. I want to go see this. I want to go see that. Right. So it's not like you always have to plan, because sometimes you want to be a little bit more free spirit. But at the same time, you got to have, some type of plan. But, I always say, man, just don't procrastinate, man. We got, just the arrogance of procrastination in our lives. Like, you have to be arrogant to procrastinate and wait. People say tomorrow. Like, remember when Apollo Creed was training Rocky and Rocky was BSing and Rocky said, man, I'll do this tomorrow. And Apollo was like, there is no tomorrow. Right. And arrogance allows us to say, I'm going to do this later, or I'm going to do that later. But more so it's our faith, because we think that we'll be here later and we'll have that time, to do something later. But don't wait. You know what I'm saying? Like, why wait? Go ahead and do what you're trying to do. And I'm not saying quit your job or do no crazy stuff like that. But, just make sure that if that's something that you want to do, you go ahead and do it. I always tell my young guns, like, stay locked in, right? Stay focused, keep your foot on the gas and just do it, right? When your feet hit the floor in the morning, you should be ready to go, right? Tell your feet, like, what we going to do today? What we doing? So you always gotta be ready. So that's my travel tips, man. I'm like, in life too, you have to be understanding, what you're doing, right? Understanding your direction.
So do you have a bucket list, like some places you just got to go before,
Yeah.
Before it all?
Before what?
Before you go to that, the Omega chapter, you know what I mean?
But yeah, man. I haven't been to Africa. I think that's my number one. Because again, it's about having some appreciation of what you have in life and going to places that are not as developed as your place. Africa is very developed, and there's some places that aren't as developed. And if you think about some of the trials and tribulations, that we're going through, whether it's with COVID and injustice and things, there's countries that just live like this, right? There's countries that just have lived like this for years, because they don't have access to healthcare. They don't have, access to, the same, economy that we have access to. And, so being able to go to a place like that and to understand, and to try to understand and get that perspective, to me, that's my bucket list, right? Because, I always feel like, like I, said in my bio, man, I just want to, represent something greater. And that's kind of what it is, and be fearless, right? Because, it's important that, that we're humble and that we're appreciative of where we're at. And we know that, in my journey in life, that you want to make a difference, man. You don't want to be, all this education that we have, we don't want to be miseducated. We want to make sure that, when I say we, again, I'm talking about, from my perspective, you want to make sure that, if you're a doctor, you want to be a doctor that wants to make some type of change. Right. If you're a lawyer, you want to be a lawyer that wants to make, some type of change, some type of impact. Because the thing about it is the money's going to come, right? We're going to make money. You're going to get money regardless. But think about, the impact that you can make, the inspiration, the influence, right? And I think that that's important when you, put those things in the front, right? Put those things in the front about, what you really want to get from this journey. And so that's what I'm about, man. It's about, being able to, try to make a difference. And I also say, I believe in, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. And you know what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd rather you see it than hear it. So let's get it done.
That's amazing. So is there anything that you want people to know about you, or any projects that you want to kind of highlight that, you're a part of?
So, I think, I'm pretty transparent a little bit, but, just in reference to being present, right? So being present, that's all I need people to know. I'm present, I'm here, professionally and things from that perspective. That's all on LinkedIn. I'm not going to, dive into all that. You can see that. But I do want to, one thing I do appreciate is I appreciate other people, doing their things as well. I like to see, I like to see our brothers that are writing books, and I like to see, I like to see the energy, that I see. And if I'm going to take a quick commercial break, John D, what's good? Going global. Pierre, my football teammate was no, this is Greg, actually. Greg with the 7 steps of success. Greg Point du jour. And this is my teammate Pierre right here. So, just a commercial break real quick, just not necessarily a commercial break, but I want to shout people out too, because I like to see when people are doing their thing. And going global, talks about, brothers that are, have similar endeavors, right? And that are traveling globally. So I just want to just shout them out real quick. That's all.
Well, once again, I want to appreciate you for doing this. You could have spent your afternoon doing something else, but you chose to share it with me. And I really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. No doubt, man. Keep doing your thing. I keep seeing you around. Maybe when you able to get back on that plane, you might, be in London or somewhere or France, hit me up. I jet over and we do what we do.
All right. Amazing.